There's this idea that people have about leaving a narcissist, that one day you just wake up strong enough, clear enough, brave enough, and you pack a bag and drive off into a new life. That is not how this works. Most women don't leave abuse because they feel powerful. They leave because they feel trapped long enough that something inside them finally snaps. It's internal. The kind that happens at 3 or 4 in the morning when you check your bank account and see one number that makes your stomach drop. For me, that was $1,000. That was it. Everything that I had to my name. I remember sitting and staring at my phone in the dark, and Hunter was sleeping next to me thinking, I cannot keep living like this. Thoughts around money lived in my head 24 hours a day. The fear was inside of me, and I just felt trapped. I was not sad. I was boxed in, and I had no way out. I couldn't leave because I had no money. I couldn't work because I had no childcare and no real job options. I couldn't talk to him about finances without it turning into a fight. I couldn't ask for help without being told I was overreacting, and I couldn't think straight because my nervous system was clenched all the time. The scariest part was not him. It was realizing that nobody was coming to save me. Not love, not hope, not my family. It was on me, and I was the only exit. This is the real story of how I became the narcissist's worst nightmare, not as a brand, but as a raw necessity. I'm Megan Webster. I'm an abuse recovery coach, a trauma-informed strategist, and the woman a narcissist hopes to never meet twice. This is the Narcissist Worst Nightmare podcast. This is not about anger or revenge. This is because I became something I was never supposed to. I became autonomous, financially independent, and someone who no longer needed permission to leave. This episode is part of the Forged in the Fire real origin story. How I built a business inside of an abusive marriage, how money changed my nervous system more than therapy ever did, and how everything I do now started with realizing that I was my only way out. When I moved to New Brunswick in 2020, it was to be with him. It was COVID, the world was shut down, I was an ex-bartender, and people love to say things like just pivot. But in that moment, I couldn't pivot into anything. There was no jobs, no normalcy, no backup plan. I left my entire life behind and walked into a province where I knew nobody and had no safety net. I was choosing love, and I did not know at the time that I was also choosing isolation. He told me before I moved that he had money, that he was stable, that I had nothing to worry about. And I believed him because he didn't give me a reason not to. I needed it to be true. The day that I moved in, the story changed. Suddenly, I was paying half of the household expenses. I remember standing there, barely off the plane, confused in a very specific way that made me want to vomit, and my brain was still trying to smooth it over. Not this is abuse, just confusion and unsettling. Like, wait. And then immediately, the self-doubt came in to clean it up for him. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I heard it wrong. Maybe this is just what adult relationships are like. That was the first hook. It was not necessarily violent abuse. It was confusion. The money he claimed to have was not real. The stability was a lie. And I didn't see it clearly because when you uproot your life for someone, you do not want to admit you made a mistake on day one. You did it to make it work. You want to be a good partner. You want to be reasonable. So instead of letting my discomfort mean something, I turned it inward and made it my job to fix this feeling. The control showed up immediately. So did the criticism and financial pressure. It wasn't like there was this slow build to it. It was instant. And when you're isolated in a new province during a pandemic with no job, no support system, your nervous system doesn't label danger the way it would if you still had options. It labels adaptation. It goes into survival math. Keep the peace. Don't rock the boat. Make it work. Be easy. Be grateful. And don't ask for too much. So I got quieter. I started explaining myself more. I started trying harder. I told myself that relationships are hard work, that I was too sensitive, that maybe I just needed to communicate better. And that's the thing about emotional abuse. It does not feel like fear at first. It feels like you are taking responsibility for everything that feels wrong, like you are becoming the manager of the dysfunction while the other person benefits from your confusion. A few months after I had moved, I found out I was pregnant, and to do the right thing, he wanted to get married not long after. From the outside looking in, we probably looked stable. New province, new relationship, sober, starting a family. The timeline people are taught to want, the kind of thing that looks like you're building a life. But inside, my body didn't feel stable. It felt like my world was shrinking, like the walls were slowly moving in, and I couldn't explain it without sounding ungrateful. In Canada, maternity leave gets talked about like it's a beautiful safety net, like you're protected and supported, but I was a bartender making $10 an hour, so my EI came out to something like $600 a month. That was my income, $600. $600 was also what I paid for my share of rented expenses. So on paper, I was on leave. In reality, I was broke before I even bought anything. I was financially underwater the entire time. And yes, I had savings, but that kind of pressure and that constant hum of money noise, you just cannot shut off. And I couldn't talk to him about it. Every conversation about money turned into an argument. He'd get defensive, angry, dismissive, like my question was an accusation and my need was an inconvenience. I learned fast that bringing up finances came with an emotional fallout, so I stopped. And when you stop bringing things up to avoid their reaction, you are not choosing peace, you are choosing self-abandonment. And that's when the isolation really does set in, because now you're alone with the problem and your fear. After my son was born, I was a stay-at-home mom. I was with a newborn in a province where I had no friends, no family, no job, no transportation of my own, and no financial leverage. I will never forget how much anxiety I had around that time as a new mom. The kind where you feel trapped in a way that you are just super hyper aware of every dollar and every decision, every mood shift. I did not feel like a partner. I felt like a dependent. I felt monitored. I had to justify my normal needs, and my body was just uptight all the time because dependence inside of emotional abuse doesn't feel like support. It feels like one argument away from instability. I think a lot of people think that emotional abuse is when someone's screaming at you all day, but sometimes it really does just look like you slowly realizing you have no options left. I wasn't being hit, I wasn't being locked in a room, but I was stuck inside of a situation where money was a weapon, conflict was a consequence, and silence became my survival strategy. My nervous system knew it before my brain could actually understand it, because your body always recognizes captivity before your pride does. About 5 months into my maternity leave, I started to panic. Every day I was doing math in my head, calculating how long my savings would last, and just this feeling of failure that I had no plan, this creeping knowing that if I didn't figure something out, my life was going to get a lot smaller. I could not go to work outside of the house because I had no childcare. I'm also a grade 10 dropout. Bartending was something that I did as a career. On paper, I looked like the kind of person that just made it work, but inside I felt completely boxed in by my own life. It wasn't just the relationship, it was also the logistics. It's also the trap that you can't explain to people who have not experienced abuse because they think that just leave is the answer. I tried to go back to my roots and reopen my catering business. I even went as far as getting a couple of military contracts lined up, and it looked promising for about 5 minutes until he shut it down completely. I remember sitting there thinking, this is what trapped feels like. Not emotionally, logistically. No matter what I did or said and whatever moves I made, I was trapped where my body goes like super cold and I can't talk my way out of this. I had gone ahead and cut off my mat leave because of those contracts. I remember that one decision felt like a lifeline and it just snapped. I was absolutely panicked. I was afraid to tell anyone, especially him, because I knew what would happen, the tone, the control, the rage, and somehow it would be all of my fault for even trying. I was up really late that night. I couldn't sleep, and I was scrolling on TikTok, and I came across a woman, a mom of 2 young kids, who talked about being a virtual assistant. I binged her content. She made it sound super simple, easy, transferable skills, and I wanted to believe it because the alternative right now was that I had nothing. There were no more options. So I went ahead and I bought a virtual assistant course from her on my credit card. I had $1,000 left to my name and no plan other than this has to work because nothing else exists. Let me tell you, I did not feel confident. I did not feel empowered. I felt desperate and ashamed and frickin' terrified that I was making a stupid decision, buying something from a stranger on the internet when my life already felt like it was balancing off a bridge. I didn't think I was smart enough to do it. I didn't know tech or computers or business language. I barely knew how to use a laptop, to be honest with you. I just knew that I needed money, and I needed it in a way that didn't require me leaving my house. And as terrifying as that was, looking back on it now, that was the first moment I felt something that felt like a glimmer of hope and a little bit of power, even if it showed up as panic first. So I went on to build this business, and I did it between nap times and feedings. Literally, my son would fall asleep and I'd open my laptop. Like, if I didn't keep moving, my life was going to just disintegrate. I would scroll on social media, watch trainings, take notes, try to understand what I was even supposed to be offering, all while listening for the sounds on the baby monitor and taking the dog out and making sure the house was in order. I didn't have a chance in that season of my life to relax and enjoy. The woman who sold the course said, just post to social media your services. That's all it takes. Just post. And I remember thinking, like, that sounds pretty simple. You know, I posted on my own profiles in the past, so I went ahead and did that and nothing happened. No messages, no inquiries, no interest. It was silent. And it felt like I'm doing this wrong, like incredible amount of failure. It was the first moment that I had doubt where I thought, I've just spent money that I don't have, trying to do something I don't understand. And that failure was going to perpetuate all of my failures from my past, confirming every ugly belief that I was carrying about myself. The way that I would keep myself stuck and small, which would also give him more reason to look at me and say I was ridiculous for even trying. But I kept going, and it wasn't because I was full of faith. It was because I didn't have the luxury of quitting. So I doubled down. I posted everywhere, Facebook groups, Instagram, messaging friends, telling people that I was trying to do this, even though I felt so embarrassed and exposed. I hated this idea of being seen in a new identity that I was not solid in yet. And I hated how vulnerable it felt telling someone I'm building something new before I actually had proof that it was going to work, and I did it anyways. And very slowly, things started clicking, not because I became some business expert overnight. I didn't. My learning was in real time. There were a lot of mistakes made in the early days, but I realized the one thing I did have in my corner was my people skills. I have always loved helping people. I knew how to communicate. I knew how to support someone. That part of me was always there, even when my whole life was a mess. So I wasn't starting from zero. I was repurposing some of my bartending skills and survival skills into something that would actually serve me. I landed interviews, then I signed my first clients, and I remember thinking, holy shit, this is actually working. My first month, I made $3,400, and I remember staring at that number on my computer screen like it didn't belong to me. Like it was an accident, like the universe was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, nope, sorry, wrong account. Because I didn't have a degree. I didn't have a resume that made sense on paper. I didn't have a mentor in my corner. I had a baby, a laptop, a house that didn't feel safe, and a nervous system that was living on caffeine and adrenaline. It was the first time in my life that money didn't come from me being on my feet, giving my body away to a restaurant shift, smiling through exhaustion, making everyone else feel comfortable. It came from my brain, from my focus, from my hard work, and that's why it hit me so hard. It wasn't necessarily the money, it was the meaning. And I should have celebrated. I should have let it be a moment, but I didn't. I felt a very weird mix of relief and fear because the math in my head finally loosened its grip for a minute, and terror because I knew what this number meant inside of my marriage. It meant becoming less controllable, harder to corner. It meant the dynamic was going to shift whether he understood this or not. And still, I told him. I didn't tell him about my income because I trusted him. I told him because I was hoping to be seen by what I had done. When you are minimized long enough, you start craving this external stamp of approval, right? The validation. And part of me wanted him to look at me differently. I wanted him to be proud. I wanted to feel like I wasn't doing this all alone. And he laughed at me, not in a way that was kind, in a way that was cruel. He said that it was cute that I was thinking that this mattered. He called me an influencer, said something to the effect of, was this a joke? And he made comments about my education, my background, my lack of credentials. And then he tried to turn my first real win in business into something very unserious, like it had happened by accident, that I didn't earn it and I didn't deserve it. And all I kept thinking to myself was, this is not the way to live. When you're in an abusive marriage, you learn that joking is rarely a joke. It is a message, it's hierarchy, and it's a reminder of where you are to belong. Normally, my nervous system would have shut down. I would have gotten smaller. I would have tried to keep the moment soft so it didn't escalate. I would have apologized for being so excited. I would have edited down my own joy to be something palatable. Because that's what you do when someone makes your confidence feel dangerous. You manage them. But that night, something else happened for me. It was not confidence. It was not empowerment. It was disgust. It was this very cold, clean cut through of programming. I remember standing there and feeling my body go completely still. Not a single thought, but like a switch flipped. My nervous system finally connected the dots and said, well, you're not going to be proud of me. You're going to punish me for this change. And instead of drawing back, I became quieter, but in a much different way. It was not out of fear, it was out of strategy. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself, and I didn't try to convince him that this was legitimate. I did not explain what I did or how I did it. I didn't ask him to understand. I didn't need him to. I just went back downstairs to my laptop like my life depended on it, because it did. That first month for me was not just a win. It was a handle to a door. And once you felt a door handle in your hand in a home you didn't think you could leave, you don't go back pretending the wall is solid. This wasn't a side hustle. This was my way out. After that, I stopped sharing everything, especially my wins. Not because I became some private person overnight. I just didn't want to celebrate with him. I stopped because I learned the rule of abusive power dynamics for the second time. When someone benefits from you being dependent, your independence doesn't inspire them, it threatens them. It destabilizes the role they've assigned you. It removes their advantage, and it changes the whole chessboard. And I could feel it almost immediately. The energy changed, the jokes got sharper, the comments were more pointed, the tone a little bit louder. He didn't have to say anything to me for me to understand that he wanted me to fail. Emotional abuse is rarely announced, it's implied, and it's forced through tension and punishment in subtle ways you've been trained to anticipate backlash before it even arrives. I didn't talk about new clients, money, or momentum. I didn't talk about the fact that my brain was waking up again. I didn't argue about the fact that I started feeling proud of myself and that pride felt dangerous inside of that house. I kept it inside me, locked down, because I knew exactly what would happen if he saw it too clearly. My business overall became a place of arguments. He would pick fights before launches. It would become guilt. It would be remarks designed to doubt myself. It would be shame telling me I'm not a good enough mom and I'm not being focused on him. It would become him attempting to reclaim the center of my attention, because the moment my attention stopped orbiting around him, his control weakened. And I did not have the capacity of being naive to that anymore. So when people say things like, why don't you just leave? Leaving is not a feeling. Leaving is logistics. It's money. It's leverage. Leaving is you building the infrastructure of your freedom in a place where freedom is actively punished. So I built in silence. Not secretive like I was doing something wrong, strategic like I was doing something necessary. I stopped handing him the access that was becoming mine. I no longer looked for validation from the person most invested in keeping me small. I stopped needing him to witness it, just needed to be protected. And that was the beginning of my exit plan before I even called it that. I just started stacking, client by client, payment by payment, month by month, quietly creating options. Safety, a future where I could make a decision without begging for permission for change. I was building a door while still living inside of the abusive house. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for a rescuer. I wasn't waiting for something different. I wasn't waiting for a perfect moment. I was preparing to ask him to leave in a way that could not be talked out of me. I know a lot of women experience the financial fear about leaving abuse. And I want to share something about a woman that reached out to me on Instagram about 6 months after I'd started my business. She had been in an 11-year relationship and she was financially controlled. She had 2 kids with him, exhausted in a way that wasn't tired. She was depleted and she couldn't remember what it felt like to be an actual person. She wouldn't call it abuse. She called it stress. She said it was overwhelming, she carried everything, and she called it being the only adult in the room. I knew exactly what she was saying, and that's how women describe their nervous system when it's still trying to make abuse survivable. She did not know my story at the time, but she was in massive debt. Collection calls were hitting her phone every single day. She was tied to the house like a maid and a taxi driver, and he did nothing and contributed nothing, but somehow still had power in their relationship because he controlled money and the story. She saw what I was doing online and messaged me. She said she wanted to try to be a virtual assistant too, that she didn't think she could do it, but she wanted to. That sentence was a big tell for me because she wasn't asking for permission. She was trying to figure out if she was allowed to live. 4 years later, she has a fully booked out business, financially independent, out of that relationship. And I wanted you to hear this part because she didn't escape from a perfect moment that just suddenly arrived. She also built leverage until leaving became the next step instead of a terrifying leap. Watching her do that reflected something back in me that I didn't fully see in myself yet. This was never just business. This was autonomy. This was women getting their nervous system back online and sourcing new options in an empowering way. What I actually learned building that first business was not just how to make money online. That is an easy headline for people to read and love. The deeper truth is that I learned I had the power to set myself free even when my environment was hostile. I learned that you do not need perfect conditions to change your life. You need strategy and enough internal permission to stop living inside somebody else's limits. I did it with sobriety, I did it emotionally, I did it financially, not after everything was calm or safe or I had healed first. I did it while actively being inside it. This is why I say things like being forged in the fire. It's not a concept. It is women who are making decisions from the inside of a situation most people cannot think you can move outside of. I don't believe your environment has much control as society wants to tell you. I don't believe you need a flawless setup or a rescue plan to start. I don't believe you need validation from anyone who benefits from you keeping small. I think women need leverage, and they need someone to tell them the truth about how this leverage needs to be built. It is quiet. It's consistent. It's built in moments you choose the right next step instead of waiting for your feelings to be perfect. Looking back, I am so proud of myself in a way that honestly shocks me. I had always worn other people's labels that felt like they were permanent. Bartender, dropout, alcoholic, revolving door mental health patient, black sheep. But then I went ahead and got sober. I had my son. I built 3 businesses online. I've been home with my son for over 3 years. I rebuilt an entire identity inside out while ending a narcissistic marriage, not because I was special or because I was confident the whole time. It's because I decided to not allow anyone else's behavior to decide the rest of my life. That was the real shift for me. It wasn't necessarily leaving him. It was discarding the version of myself that believed I was trapped. There are parts now looking back on this, I didn't realize how small my life had become without fully realizing it. It wasn't about being weak or clueless. My nervous system just adapted to being inside of a box and be with someone who wanted me to shrink. I wasn't dreaming about a future anymore. I wasn't imagining what I wanted. I was managing what I had, containing damage, preserving stability, calling it strength while my world got narrower. I stopped asking myself, how do I survive this? And started asking, how do I build my way out? Everything changed. Not overnight, structurally, foundationally, because you don't leave a high control, abusive relationship by becoming brave in a single moment. You leave when you have leverage. It's having options, autonomy, being able to make a decision without your body going into full panic because you know you can land on your feet. That part rebuilt parts of my identity that nothing else ever could. Not understanding every single detail, analyzing every pattern, reliving every memory, building a future that I could actually control. That is what took me from living at the mercy of somebody else's mood to living inside of my own authority. If this episode landed with you today, it's probably because part of you already knows insight is not enough. You can understand the abuse and still feel stuck inside of logistics. You can still feel clear and have no options. Later this month, I am hosting the Get the Fuck Out game plan. It is not going to be anything other than strategy to help you build financial autonomy to leave an abusive relationship. I will also be sharing how I protected it long enough to grow and why that was the exit strategy before I actually exited the relationship. If you are done waiting for things to get better and you're ready to start building something that gives you actual leverage, the Get the Fuck Out game plan call is for you. It is free. I'm going to show you how to start this exact business to build your way out. You can register in the show notes. You don't need to do anything other than understand you can outgrow what's been containing you. This is the Narcissist Worst Nightmare podcast, and if you can build income in hell, you can build freedom anywhere.